Hello. Hello, Justin.
Hey,
So,
thanks for having me. I've come with Grogu and a Yoshi egg, and ready to chat today.
yeah, Justin is one of our patrons, and as a patron, you get to set up meetings with us. And Justin was like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about Stoicism." Probably because on a Q&A a couple weeks ago, um, someone asked us about Stoicism, and Armin and I didn't really have any strong opinions on it. Um, Myself, mostly because I know very little about it. Um, I have kind of this idea in my mind of the word Stoic, you know, and there's kind of mental imagery that comes with it. But in terms of like a hard philosophy, I honestly don't know very much. But Justin, I'll introduce you. Justin is the PR manager for Atheist for Liberty, um, of which I am a member. And um, you also have two of your own podcasts. So plug those podcasts.
Yes, it's the Stoic Solutions podcast. That's more
Oh,
relevant to what we're talking about today.
as a matter of
And
fact.
yes. And the second is the Hurdy-Gurdy Travel podcast, where I talk about, of course, travel, credit cards, deals, and rewards to help people travel the world at next to no cost.
Fantastic. How long have you been doing both of those respectively?
Oh, Stoicism for maybe about 3 or 4 years, and the other podcast and the credit card related stuff for about two.
Cool.
Recent interests.
Okay. So, I mean, we're going to have this as a conversation, but I'm just going to be, it's going to be very easy for me to act like I, play the role of an ignorant audience. So,
or the interviewer.
yeah, right. So, if you had to describe like what the elevator pitch for Stoicism would be, like how would you describe it?
Sure. So we're talking about a philosophy of life that's primarily focused on virtue or character, as we would think about it today, talking about things such as courage, fortitude, taking on challenges, and looking to not only improve ourselves, but also help others. The Stoics introduced the philosophy in times of turmoil, recognizing that many things are outside of our control. And it's a prime task for us to distinguish what's inside and what is outside of our control to have a fulfilled life and have more reasoned beliefs about the world.
Okay, cool. Like, yeah, because when I think Stoic, right, I think of just a very the mental imagery that comes to my mind, or what if I'm just doing free association, is like I think of kind of a bootstrap mentality, very much kind of Spartan, you know, um, in the sense that almost, well, when I think Spartan, I think kind of like a minimalist, like just what you need to get the tasks done, like, or I think what do I think of, like hard work? I think of just kind of a what my dad would call like a trooper,
Right.
like you don't I think I'm kind of stoic in some ways, or because I'm just like, no, like you just have to be a trooper. You're just gonna like,
Yes.
you're gonna like
Yeah.
you're gonna
There's
you're gonna put your fifis, you're gonna put your feelings aside, and you're just gonna get it done, like very much just a yeah, hard work, kind of eschewing some amount of emotionality to just like focus almost singularly like on a task or a goal. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's a lot of that as words change over time. So we're talking about ancient Greece and Rome to modern day. When you see the word stoic with the lowercase s in the
Yeah.
dictionary, it's typically thought of as unflinching or
Yeah.
unchallenged, something like that. But when we're talking about the philosophy, there is lots of talk about emotion, in that too much emotion or even too little emotion can be a bad thing. So the Stoics in many ways
Certainly.
are looking for moderation, as there are many passages within the works of Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus, who are most famous in the philosophy and what people are reading today. They're talking about, well, there are things in life that might be difficult to deal with, like the death of others, our own death, experiencing anger, dealing with significant adversity. So the question is, how are we best to deal with life? How are we to find fulfillment in a life where many things are very perceived as difficult or outside of our control? As it would be silly for one to lament, oh, what a terrible day today is and what a terrible life is because it's raining outside, right? So the Stoic will wonder, well, how are we to deal with these things that are outside of our control? How can we possibly make the best of a situation? How can we learn a lesson from it? How are we to thrive with adversity?
I think that's a very good point, because, again, maybe it was just kind of the culture of my family, but I have very low tolerance for people who, how can I say this on YouTube?
You have to use the secret dictionary, the secret language, yes.
We'll just bitch about things that are outside of your control.
Complaining, yes, complaining.
Yeah, whining. There we go.
Right.
It would frustrate me so much, like when, like, just to kind of give a stereotype of an example that's kind of in our culture. Say like a guy and a girl are on a date, and then something goes wrong with the date. Oh, the reservation didn't work, or the food wasn't right, or car broke down or something, or oh, I got, we were supposed to be reserved for this hotel, but I screwed up the dates. There's kind of this stereotype of, like, likely the woman just like kind of falling out and being like, it's not right. Guys,
it's a disaster. It's all ruined.
Guys, I'm just working off of stereotypes, okay? And that I have a very low tolerance for those kinds of people. Like, when I'm met with those situations, I kind of have already like moved past the fact that something didn't go as planned, because I'm just like, okay, like, what can we do now? Trying to be more solution oriented, because like what happened was outside my control. This is where we are now. How can we move forward?
Acceptance is a very important thing within the philosophy, as we're to reflect on all the things that might happen or things that could go wrong. How can we prepare for these things? That if we can think ahead, if we can plan, then we'll be in better shape, rather than just flying by the seat of our pants. And how are we going to know how to overcome this adversity if we haven't thought of it, or if we haven't had that experience, or if we have too high expectations going into something, or super unrealistic expectations going into something? So the acceptance is a thing, and it's not about resignation, it's not about passivity, but rather about how are we to do our best with what we have. In the pre-show, we were talking about one of my other interests, poker. In poker, it's very unreasonable to go in thinking that you'll win every hand. It's just not going to happen.
What are you talking about?
You'll often have very good hands. Say a very simple explanation is that, say, a player goes all in pre-flop, before any of the cards, the community cards, are dealt. You have pocket aces, of course you call, and the player turns over kings, and right on the flop there's that king, and you lose the hand. Well, these things are bound to happen. We can't have wins all the time, but this is an analogy. And the couch.
I just realized I forgot the overlay.
Oh, the overlay.
Guys, because I forgot the overlay, you have to make sure you subscribe. Well, this is maybe going to be on Armin's personal channel first, but make sure you subscribe to Atheist Republic, and make sure you subscribe to our newsletter in case the purge comes for us.
Yes. Well, possibly. I think it already has a little bit on Facebook. So unfortunately,
not a full purge, but they're like,
yeah, the strike. So hopefully we won't say any naughty words in this one.
Yeah,
so yes,
exactly.
Returning a little bit, acceptance is that very important thing, that we're to understand that life isn't always a picnic, that there are going to be ups and downs. And this is kind of the situation, the human situation. So what are we to do about it? Should we just stay in bed all day and not look to take on anything and just live this super passive, secluded life? The Stoics would say, no, go take action, go have some purpose, go fill some role in life and find meaning, rather than lamenting that life is pointless, that we can't aspire to anything, that we can have a positive attitude about things.
Yeah, so this seems very different than kind of the more Buddhist or Taoist kind of conception of non-attachment. It's not strive for a place of non-attachment. It's more just like accept when things are going to be separated from you, so to speak. Because, well, so I come from a psychological background, and I can't remember what psychologist this was, but he was involved in development, cognitive development, and childhood development. And maybe it was Erik Erikson, but I don't think so. Anyways, he talks about how one of the most defining things in our lives is in what defines like our temperament, and also just how we cope. And in some aspects, like our success is each individual's ability to create attachments, and then how they cope with the inevitable separation. Because basically everything in life that you become attached to will leave your life at one point or another.
Yeah.
Like, there are. I can't think of like either it gets separated from you, or you're separated from, or you're dead. Like, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, it kind of reminds me of that attitude.
The Stoics were very, very aware of that, and there are many parallels, I think, with Eastern religions or Eastern philosophies. And there's talk in Stoicism of, yes, don't become overly reliant on what they call externals, these things that are outside of us, these things that we lack control over, because they're subject to ruin. Maybe a child will die, maybe a loved one will go away, maybe we'll be exiled from our country. That was a more common thing in their times. So you can't be so overly reliant on one person, one thing. So the idea is, how are we to build up our own character? How are we to live life on our own? If we had to, we can certainly look toward others. They talked about the importance of friendship. They talked about the importance of community in their texts, and that we can work together, but not be overly reliant on another, because that can be a bad relationship. What if that other person goes away? Then how are we to thrive then, if we're so stuck on one person helping us live our lives?
Yeah, so a certain aspect of like internal fortitude. That makes a lot of sense. How did you first become so interested in Stoicism?
Yeah, I had listened to Massimo Pigliucci's then podcast called Rationally Speaking. He hosted it with Julia Galef. Julia Galef is now the sole host of the show. He talked about Stoicism in an episode, and I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, but then I heard about Stoicism in another podcast. So it was coming through many, many different ways. And it was the Thinking Poker podcast, where they were talking about the works of Epictetus, his handbook, or Enchiridion is the fancy word there. And they were talking about how Stoicism can help one's mental game in poker. And I found a lot of parallels between the works and things that are relevant to poker, but then realized, oh, well, these are lessons that are more applicable to life in general. So I delved more into it, read more of the text, started the podcast, and started to talk about this with a humanist group when I was in the Philadelphia, or actually, yeah, because I'm back in Philly now. But it was a humanist group. Yes, the Humanist Association of Greater Philadelphia. So I helped hosted some discussion groups for them, and I have the podcast that has almost 100 episodes. I'm getting there. A little bit of a hiatus, but I've had several guests from authors, teachers, and even musicians who came on the show and talked about their music. One band, for instance, one of my favorites, Cellar Darling, they have a song called Hullabaloo, which was formerly titled Tears of a Stoic. So obviously they were inspired by Stoic philosophy. They happened upon my content and came on the show, so it was a real pleasure to chat with them.
That's cool. What do you think are some of the, no, actually, I'll ask that question later. So what's some of the more nitty-gritty of Stoicism? You've kind of given us a broader overview.
Sure. There's talk about the frugal life, in that it can be a real detriment to be overly focused on wealth and possessions. And some people think, oh, well, look, I need to spend money to have a better life. Spending money is going to make me happier. But the Stoics and modern psychologists realize that this is a trap, because once we get more, we tend to want more, and we're still not satisfied. We hear about many celebrities in modern days who have all this money, but they're still unhappy. They're still looking for more. The wants get more. Desire can be quite the destructive thing. So the Stoics are asking us to question what must be traded for what. That if we're going to work these really long hours, aspire to gain all this money and use it to buy things, and we're still living paycheck to paycheck, we have more things, but yet we still have to put in all this time, is that quite worth it? So can we have a more moderate life where we're having more peace of mind, having more of our time to do what we want to do in life? And can we be happy with getting by with a moderate lifestyle, not living in squalor, not like living in a hut in the streets or being homeless or something like that? They look for more of a moderate perspective and say, well, maybe you can find fulfillment in other things. And that's not working these super, super long hours and toiling in a job that we don't like. It's not selling out our character in order to gain possessions or exploiting others in certain ways. So it's a real thing to reflect on, this question of what must be traded for what. They often have these rants about expensive food and saying, oh, well, look, you're going to be spending all this money and wearing these like super fancy clothes that you don't really need to eat these dinners, and is it all really worth it when you could just have a more moderate lifestyle? And maybe Armin would be happy to hear a lot of talk about being vegetarian within the Stoic texts, in that participating in eating of animals can be considered a savage butchery, at least according to Seneca, who was reflecting on another author's work at the time. So they're saying, yes, maybe the lavish life isn't really all that it's cracked up to be. Be content with less and have a more moderate lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense, because you think about, what's it called? Like, I think it's called lifestyle inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, well, I can afford more, so I'm just gonna spend it now to like build this lifestyle. But then that lifestyle itself is very expensive to maintain. So, yeah, a lot of people just end up going broke that way, because they're just continue to expand like outside their means, usually too quickly. That
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot of sense. But
Yeah.
it seems like the idea of virtue, or how you put it, what we would now call character, is very
Mm-hmm.
foundational. And the way we use these words is obviously different than back then, but are there like specific virtues that are highlighted more? Well, like being frugal, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
is one.
Yeah, moderation, simplicity. Mm-hmm. I mentioned courage earlier. Mm-hmm. That's an important thing. They talk about aspiring, having goals, rather than just being content with where we are in life. That, well, we could recognize maybe a character flaw, that we could have a mindfulness of sorts to recognize something that we can improve on, and to set realistic goals. To not say, okay, well, hey, I have this New Year's resolution. I'm going to lose 30 pounds and sign up for the Planet Fitness membership or whatever. Of course, Planet Fitness not around in that time. But what people will do is they'll set these really extreme goals. They're not really thinking into it. Maybe they're following trends. Maybe they just have a hope and a dream, but there's not much of a structure to it. So if we're saying, hey, I've gained a little bit of weight during the lockdown, maybe I should start losing weight. Well, let's set up a realistic plan to do that, rather than just being content with our current state, that we're looking to take on some kind of challenge. And for many people, exercise can be a thing. It could be easy to put off. It can be easy to overeat. It can be easy to just be lazy, right? But the Stoics are calling for us to take on some challenge in life, and that this could be a character building experience. Maybe it's learning a new trade. Maybe it's a new skill. Maybe it's taking some risks. Seneca, for instance, talks about stage fright, in that some people would just be they'd be so shaken up by going on the stage and giving a speech in front of someone, or playing a musical instrument or something. And well, maybe there can be something gained in this. And he notes to be realistic about it as well, as even the most practiced speaker might have that little tinge of nervousness. And maybe it's something we can never shake away and wholly be done with, but it helps to be humble. It helps to notice that, okay, hey, this is this emotion that I'm feeling right now. This is the current situation. So being aware of it is really helpful, as some people just might not be. Some people go from like 0 to 10 with anger, and suddenly they just lose all of their composure.
Yeah.
So if we can have the state of like, okay, you know, I'm not feeling too comfortable right now, so maybe I should remove myself from this situation or let someone know about this, right? This is having a humble character rather than thinking, oh, I'm above it all, I can get through anything. That's an extreme brashness that should be avoided.
What do you think are some negatives to a Stoic philosophy?
Oh, some difficult things. So the question of death is an interesting one, because the Stoics will note the deaths of others as being something inevitable. And there's a passage from Epictetus that talks about, think of your child as you might think of a possession. It's liable to destruction. Know that your
In more ways than one.
Yeah, know that your child might die. And some people, I think, who don't have such a great understanding would say, oh, he's just being so callous, but they're not understanding.
But that's real life.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not understanding the greater picture of this idea, this theme that life is a fragile thing, as we've mentioned before. Mm-hmm. So sometimes Stoicism can get a bad rap for that reason, but knowing more about it and not being so quick to write it off is one thing. Another thing, yeah, some people will have a hard time with the frugal lifestyle. Mm-hmm. They think like, oh, I need these luxuries. Like personally, when I'm traveling, when I go out to eat, if I absolutely have to spend money, I'm looking at spending maybe like $10 or $15, and I'm very happy with that. I'll get the ice water. Sometimes I'll put some Splenda in it. You know, it's like for me, it doesn't seem like, why would I want to spend the money on the Coca-Cola or whatever the Soleil water that this I even got for free in some ways. Yes. So it's saying, hey, just be more content with less. And some people say, oh, you're a joy killer, you know, oh, it's not worth it. And, you know, okay, there can be those occasions where we maybe splurge a little bit or buy something nice for ourselves, but it's done in moderation for sure. And we want to live within our means. Sometimes it can be better to just refuse that. Oh, well, you know what? Hey, there's this cheesecake here, but I'll just say no to it because maybe it'll be too much for me. Like you of course hear of the person who has struggled with alcohol, in that they think that they can't even just drink one drink, because if they drink one, it's going to turn into 5, and that's going to be a very bad time for them. So if we can have the moderation, then that's great. But certain things for some people are surely to be avoided. So it's not a one size fits all philosophy, and I think that's a strength of it, rather than being dogmatic and saying there's only this one way to live, right? That's not for everyone. Mm-hmm. People have different lifestyle, people have different talents and skills. So in many ways, Stoicism is a big tent, something that's applicable for all. And I think that's a strength for sure.
Yeah, how do you think our culture nowadays could use more Stoicism?
Yeah, I think being reflective is a very important thing, having a sense of doubt and saying, hey, maybe I'm mistaken about something. Maybe I shouldn't have too much fervor toward a particular position. And as the Stoics talk about, really getting to the bottom of things and examining our own ideas, talking to others about it, and engaging with people who are very different from us. As we see a lot of polarization in the United States and the rest of the world, we could tend to go away from this and not be so dogmatic. Even the Stoics in their texts talk about competing philosophical schools at the time, and they quote rival authors or rival teachers and say, hey, there's something good of this tradition. There's something that can be learned here. Oh, look, he was right about this, rather than like, oh, well, this one person said this one thing, so they need to be canceled. They're terrible. You shouldn't listen to anything that they have to say. Like kind of that perspective of people not giving others a chance. If we can use opportunities to learn and listen to others, I think that's a really good thing. Of course, we're not doing that in all scenarios, because some people are going to be written off. That's not what I'm saying. Like, give everybody the podium and let's listen to certain people like all the time and give all of our attention to random comments online. You know, we can't do that, but we can certainly have a sense of doubt and be happy with that. So that's a good thing. If we find out that we made a mistake or something has changed, then that's part of progress.
Yeah, like a willingness to be challenged. Yeah, because when you were talking about this idea of courage, or the way it's conceptualized with these philosophers, like some of the ways that you're talking about it sounded almost to me more like ambition. you know, like with the setting of goals, but you know, keeping them realistic, but you know, understanding what's within our control, what is not within our control, but then also just not like sitting necessarily, just sitting within that acceptance, you know, like a willing,
Right. We're not resigning.
yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. Like a willingness to pursue something greater and higher, which is just kind of like a theme with a lot of Greek philosophers. You know, I think of, you know, like Plato's ladder and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Another thing within, you talked about a weakness or what would be something that's different. So the Stoics talk about gods. Some will be quite pious in time and talk about prayer and talk about maybe a divine order to things. Right. So the philosophers themselves say, hey, people before us are our teachers, and we're going to improve on what they said. So there's this idea that, yeah, we could be wrong about something, that maybe if we're to transplant the ancient Greeks and Romans to modern times, would they believe in any gods? What would they look like? What would they think about the world? Maybe they would have different ideas. So some people have departed from the so-called classical tradition to more of a modern tradition and said, okay, well, hey, we can reconceptualize some of the ideas in this philosophy. And instead of thinking of gods or a divine order, we can think of the world as a connected place. We can think of ourselves and others as a community, this cosmopolis. Some of the authors and moderns talk about this connectedness about things. And many religious people are within Stoic groups. Many atheistic people, of course, are as well.
It's interesting because I feel like this idea of courage in the sense of a kind of self-development could kind of conflict with some of the kind of like radical self-acceptance that I think has been popularized over the
see.
past decade.
I see some. I saw it was like a magazine cover of Cosmopolitan, I think it was, that was saying like.
I was thinking of the exact same thing.
It's the fat acceptance movement of like, oh well, it's not unhealthy at all to be obese, and you know, you be you, and you know, you're the best, and like, okay, well, I don't think we should shame people for being overweight by any means. But hey, we could say, well, maybe this isn't the healthiest lifestyle to go about, and okay, there are ways to improve our lifestyle and take those gradual steps, right? Because if you're going to say like, oh, I'm just over everything, I'm better than everything, and that's not a humble attitude to take at all, right? There's always some area for improvement.
Yeah, for those who don't know what we're talking about, the Cosmopolitan magazine recently released a series of 11 covers where they're like, it was they branded this edition of the magazine like, this is healthy, and some of the covers included images of women who are categorically obese or morbidly obese. And that's like not me being judgmental. Like, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I have watched doctors give commentary on exactly this subject, and they're like, yes, these people are obese. And so, like, just to clarify that, okay? And including a picture of a woman who, I don't know what you call this yoga pose, but she was standing on one leg, and then she had, you know, her arm back, and the other arm was like holding up the other foot. I don't know what you call that pose, but yeah, and this is healthy campaign was very controversial, and it got a lot of backlash because people are just saying like, it's not, you know, like it's really interesting to see doctors like come up across this radical self-acceptance, especially in terms of like radical body positivity, radical fat positivity, because their message often isn't heard, I feel like. And I was watching a lot of doctors give their commentary on specifically this issue, and they're like, we don't agree with fat shaming, like, but there has to be a middle. There has to be a middle,
right
between fat shaming someone, making them feel like they are worthless because of this one thing about their body. fat it's complex. It's a complex physical state. There are so many and numerous things that could contribute to that physical state, right? It's not a one size fits all. And so just making someone feel, just so diminished over what is usually a complex health situation going on, that to the point that they may not even want to try to.
Yeah, they give up.
Yeah, they might not want to try to improve their situation, to lying to people and saying that this is totally fine. There's nothing to worry about here. This is healthy, which is not true, because like some 95% of like, I can't remember what the statistic is, so I shouldn't quote it. But basically, obesity contributes to your life being shortened.
Sure.
Like the vast majority of diseases are, well, not the vast majority of diseases. Many diseases are greatly exacerbated by the presence of obesity, excess fat. Fat itself is just not, too much of it is not good for us, period. It's very, I feel like that's one area where our culture could use more stoicism, where you have a certain level of acceptance over the various health conditions that are likely creating the situation to arise in the first place, right? Like you have to have an understanding, you have to be able to label it, but then you need to have the courage to say, well, what about this is within my control to help improve my life and ultimately increase my lifespan?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, to not neglect one's health. And on Stoicism, it's character that's this important thing, not like someone's looks, or, I mean, there are people who might be born and have like a disfigured complexion, or maybe they're very short, or maybe they're super tall, or people who are lanky, right? You see some people on internet forums, like it's men and women who are saying like, oh, I can't get in a relationship, I'm doomed forever, it's just not going to work at all. And that's quite a nihilistic, resigned point that some people can take on and say, maybe some people will have a single life, and that's okay. The Stoics talk about that too. Not everyone is meant to be a wife or a father, or maybe meant is not the proper word there, but not everyone has to live that kind of life. There can be many ways that people can contribute to society without having biological children or adopted children or anything. Maybe there can be different paths. There's an awareness that our roles can change throughout life, and that's okay.
Yeah.
If we can take stock of our own skills or talents, or take on some calling of sorts, then we can make a difference. It's not that like 2.5 children, white picket fence, like life that everybody has to have, where people are maybe just listening to tradition, which is not necessarily a good thing. Just because everyone did something one way for some time, or your parents were this way, or your family's this way, doesn't mean that you have to do it. It's just not the case. So the Stoics are saying, hey, we could find meaning and we could find fulfillment in certain ways. I know, and you've talked about in some streams before about the incel community, and some men are just convinced. I was going to
talk about that.
Yeah, some men are just convinced that, oh, because I can't get in a relationship, that my life is just miserable. But it's like, well, how about you find something else and a different pursuit? It's not all about that Stacy out there, right? It just isn't. Not everyone has to be a Chad, right? It's okay.
Yeah. Well, in fact, everyone can't be.
Yeah.
Like, but it's so interesting because it reminds me. I used to be used to listen to the podcast, the last podcast on the left a lot, which is more of like true crime comedy, which seems like a weird combo, but it's really funny. And one of the hosts, I can't believe I can't remember his name. I think it might be Henry. Anyways, he's like this short, fat ginger man, and who's like weird and into murder, like and he was talking about like he went on this rant about the incels that hate him because he has a tall, gorgeous wife, and they send him death threats because he has a tall, gorgeous wife. And he's like, he went on this rant about how it's like, guys, like, I should have been an incel. I should have been like you, but it was like, I'm going to compensate for this. I'm not going to sit in the fact that I'm short and fat and ginger. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, you know
The
what?
ginger you might not be able to change though.
I mean, hair dye.
Yeah.
But he was like, you know what I did is I got funny, you know? Like, I got funny. Women like funny, you know? I'm not just going to sit there and, what do they call it? They call it black pilled, right?
Oh yeah. There are some
Yeah,
elements that think that it's
he's
just
like,
impossible, that that life has just taken away so many things, and I have some sympathy for that, because there are some people who, just for whatever reason, maybe there's social awkwardness, maybe they're on the spectrum, maybe there's something about them, maybe it's other people in many cases. Like, look how many percent of marriages end in divorce. It just doesn't work out, and you could give it your best effort, and what if the other person just decides, like, hey, you know what, I'm out, or this isn't for me. You get that honeymoon period, but then like a month later, it's like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Shoot.
The flame goes out, right? So I think there can be a more enlightened, positive life that people can take on, rather than just trying to take everyone else down with them. That's a very bad path to go on. And certainly it's not all who identify as black pilled or incel, but I have seen that go some ways. It's just like in any community, there can be some really nasty people, even in atheist communities, for sure. You have it all in every community.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we shouldn't expect that any community is going to be like just awesome people. That's just totally unrealistic. Talk about things we can't control.
Yeah, of course.
But it's just so frustrating. Like, you go on some of these like incel forums, and like it gets very weird. Like, watching men like post photos of themselves, and then the other men are like picking apart their appearance about like the angles of their face and the symmetry and all this stuff. It reminds me of like stereotypes of middle school girls doing that to each other. Like, when I went to an all-girls middle school, and we were very incredibly highly critical of each other's appearance, and would say so, pick apart little things. I remember reading this children's book about like a group of girls who actually wrote the flaws on each other's bodies and stuff. And that was fictional, luckily, but just this mentality, and to see it in grown men, but then have no one saying like, you guys can actually change some of this. You guys can go about self-development, or if there's something about your appearance that, would deem you a quote unquote virgin, just beyond reproach, like you can be attractive in your character.
Sure. Yeah. Many different things to take on. Yeah, there's this idea of looks maxing or look maxing, where they think that, oh, well, if I can present a certain way, then I'll be more attractive and I'll find that partner. But yeah, is that really the area of focus? That maybe you can do something like working out, or taking on some kind of side hustle to gain more money and have more resources, and that might be something that a partner might want. Or they can just say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to be content with a single life. If something comes about, then maybe I'll explore that opportunity, but it's not necessary for me to have a fulfilled life. That I think would be a great perspective that some people can take as, you can have this like Disney fantasy that, look, I'm going to get married, life is going to be amazing, but maybe it won't be. Maybe that's not the path. Maybe that's not the only path.
Don't they call, I could be getting, I'm not as tapped into the community. Isn't that,
I try to be knowledgeable about the internet. I really do.
Isn't it kind of like the men going their own way?
Yeah. I had a MGTOW content creator on my podcast. His name is Sunrise Hoodie, and he talks about how he just doesn't want a relationship, because he sees that a lot of what's needed to maintain a relationship or even pursue a relationship is not worth the effort. He'd rather be more independent in life. Although some will say, if that opportunity comes about, then maybe pursue it, maybe. But some are just saying, hey, I just want a life of being single, and that, hey, I have more life agility, I have more minimalism in life, I have more freedom of schedule, I can just do what I want and not have to have those negatives that could come about with a relationship. Although they acknowledge that, okay, there can be that one great partner out there, but is that very likely? What's the cost of this, right? So there are all kinds of different perspectives within the MGTOW communities, for sure.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
only
And of
discovered.
course, there's the WGTOW too, WG, women going their own way. So
What is that like? Wait, tell me about this.
I think some of the same, although I haven't been much in those communities or researched into that.
Mhm.
But I know that there are some women who will say, "Hey, I don't want relationships either." And there's the child-free communities or child-free
I was
movement
thinking
where
of the
people,
child-free.
yeah, people saying that, "Hey, I just don't want kids at all ever." There's
Yeah.
also that too. So there are a lot of ways to have this a good life. It's just a question of what is best for you. That, again, there's not only one way, and I think that's a real strength of Stoicism in saying that, hey, there can be a lot of ways to have fulfillment in life. There isn't this one particular thing. Whereas many traditional religions can be like, okay, well, here's your goal, here's what you need to do. There's aspirations for heaven or some kind of afterlife, and this is your path. That can be really limiting and bad. So Stoicism, I think, offers a lot of alternatives to that. Maybe you can be this great entertainer. Maybe you can be a good wrestler and entertain people, or maybe you can be a teacher, or maybe you can whatever, as long as you're benefiting the greater good, as they would often say.
Mhm. How would a Stoic philosophy or outlook, what would the, how do I want to phrase this? Like, what would the, how would it consider, or how does it consider, like, mediocrity? Like, the fact is that, like, very few people are actually exceptional at what they do, right? So does
Mhm.
it talk about, like, I don't know, how to come to terms with their own mediocrity at all?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I did talk about goal setting. That can be a certain thing, as Epictetus talked a lot in his text about anger, and that he'd be one to be quickly angered. And the Stoics talk a lot about how anger can be a very destructive thing. It's not something we're to prefer. Do we really want to be with clouded emotions and very passionate if that leads to destructive ends? We can have a better temperament than that. In some ways, it can be helpful, I suppose, but is that really going to be the preferred weapon you'd want to take into battle? They would say no. So they're talking about, okay, well, hey, let's first have a mindfulness about it, that maybe for whatever reason, my upbringing, my culture, whatever, that maybe I'm more prone to this than others are. So maybe I can set some reasonable goals to at least first notice it, to try to reduce the frequency of that, right? There's that there's an acceptance, right? That maybe I can be more of an introverted person, for example, and if I'm around too many people at once, I get very exhausted or drained. So maybe
Mm.
my role isn't so much being the front person and being that like social butterfly at the party or whatever. Maybe that's just not for me, or like loud noises aren't so great. Like, just putting out some examples here. So maybe one would be better to be a planner or more behind the scenes. As yes, it's not going to be possible to excel in everything ever. So it's taking a character inventory and seeing what are you good at. And I think there are many tests out there in modern days where you can take some kind of interest survey or personality survey. Many workplaces do this and see like what style is best for you, what positions might be good for you, this career exploration or life exploration. I think that can be a helpful thing. The Stoics also note mediocrity in others. Marcus Aurelius talked a lot about imagine when you wake up that you will deal with the unruly, the immoderates, and you're going to deal with these other people who
These
are going to be,
hooligans.
yeah, add some difficulty to your life. But is that difficulty really difficulty, or is that our perception of it? As the Stoics talk about impressions, that we have these. Oh, there's a little echo.
Oh.
I don't know what happened there. Okay. They talk about impressions that will have some thoughts about the world, but are they really accurate? So we're often to challenge our thoughts if they don't really match up with how things really are. So it's inevitable that we're going to have some people who come into our life. I think it's Marcus Aurelius, or no, Epictetus, who mentions, imagine just being at the gym and you're running around on these mats and exercising, and someone just happens to bump into you. Like, what is the proper attitude to think about that? That the person just did this on purpose and he's just trying to ruin your life in some way? Well, that would be a little bit much. But just see that this person just accidentally bumped into you, and in life there are many things that just come about that could cause you some inconvenience. So we're to be resilient, we're to have a sense of fortitude and carry on, and not give up. There's always some kind of challenge that could present itself, and other people can certainly be a challenge. They talk about the danger of crowds and just being swept up in some really nasty thoughts, and surrounding ourselves with good people. that if we're to have some friends who have some bad tendencies, like maybe we know people who are drug users, and because of that, we're more prone to use and going down a destructive path. So that'd be something to be wary of, and also having people that we can share our innermost thoughts and feelings with. That this is an important thing about friendship. Whereas maybe we've known some people in our lives, family members, where we would tell them something, confide in them something, and they would be very dismissive about that. And like, oh, you're just being a baby, or oh, you're just being this or that. Like these aren't good friends, right? Are these could be family members, but are they really that valuable if they're not going to be enriching your lives? If other people are dragging us down, it can be a cause for us to separate from them.
That's very true. Yeah, it made me think of I don't know how much of this I can say on YouTube. This girl, I'll just say this girl I knew in college who was involved in some shady things. And I remember her saying to me, I can't remember why, but she basically said, like, you become the people you surround yourself with. And she didn't necessarily mean that in like a guilt by association way. She meant it more like, you know, over time, your goals and aspirations can kind of either rise to or like sink to goals and aspirations of those who are around you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's kind of funny she said that, because then that was one of the reasons why I stopped being around her.
Oh, so she was the one dragging you down rather than lifting you up, huh?
Like,
she didn't realize the lesson, huh?
Yeah,
Go the
like
other way.
wake up call.
Yeah, imagine what it's like Charlie Brown and the Peanuts, the character Pigpen, who just goes around with a cloud of dust all the time, right? It's like that rust can rub off on you too when you're around certain other people.
Yeah, but I thought that was very, very well put. Like, if you're not careful, you can really become just like the people who you surround yourself by. Like,
yeah, and I had a discussion group on this topic of friendship, and one person seemed very angry. It was the most controversial discussion group that I hosted, and
about friendship?
About friendship, because his initial response is like, oh, that sounds really elitist. What do you mean only choose the best people to be around and to be careful about the people you're around? Like, oh, are you just better than everyone else and other people are terrible? And I explained that no, it's simply not the case. We're to be more careful and take an inventory of people we choose to spend our time with. And if people are adding some negativity or a lot of negativity to our life, then maybe that can be grounds to separate after trying to salvage the situation or find out what's going on. To not be too hasty in severing relationships with others, but just being very careful about that is really important. And in modern days, I wonder, like, how much time can we reasonably dedicate to certain friendships or associations, especially with social media, minus Parler or Parlay today, unfortunately. We can have all these friends online.
You know what was so funny? Because Thomas was like, Susanna, you gotta get AR on Parler. You gotta do it. And literally within 24 hours, Justin, I was like, yeah, I don't think it's worth spending our time investing into this platform.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, this didn't age very well.
Yeah, have you seen that South Park episode where they go inside of the bank? He hands money over to the banker, and the banker's like, all right, we're going to reinvest this in foreign currency, and it's gone.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's gone? Oh, well, all your money's gone. Next customer, please.
Just like,
it was very sudden. Yeah.
Yeah, that was wild. Oh my gosh. I'm still trying to figure out, like, what I feel about that whole situation.
Yeah, another show for another day. I say, yeah, we have all these friends and connections online, but how many can we really say are close friends? Like, how much time do we have to cultivate? I mean, do people pick up the phone and talk to people on the phone, right? Do people do that nowadays? Like, maybe you have a conversation with someone for 15 minutes, a half an hour, maybe it's text messaging. But which of these are really considered close friends? Do you have more room to take people in? It's good to survey that, because if you have like 20 close friends, is that so much of a reasonable thing to say? Maybe not. But if we're to spread ourselves too thin and we don't have strong relationships and strong friendships, whatever, that could be a negative thing too. So it's important to think about that, I think.
It's really
how
interesting.
are we spending our time too is the larger question. Yeah.
I remember I went to a talk by what's his name, Dr. Lasana Harris, and he's a psychologist, or maybe he has a background in neuroscience. Um, and he studies basically like sociocognition. And in his talk, he talks about how like basically our brains are not wired for like more than like caring about more than 150 people. No, seriously, like, because throughout our evolution, like, we were in these, like, mobile tribes of, like, typically not more than, like, 150 people. So we can, like, I mean, and that's obviously, like, an estimate, but we only have, like, the capacity to, like, really, like, care and be engaged with, like, 150 people. And so that informed some of his work around how we decide who we care about, right? And it also, he gave this example of like, how does a student in seminary, trained to be like this pious priest or whatever, walk past a homeless person on the street, right? Those seem incompatible. But at the same time, our brains are making these calculations about like how many people can we care about. I can't fix everyone that I see on the street every day.
Sure, sure.
Like I have to invest that energy in very specific places to try to maximize like what good I can do with that. And so I think this idea of being selective about like who's in your inner circle just makes a lot of sense because that's just so wired into how we function.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you gotta be selective with those 150 guys.
Yeah, sure. And sometimes it can make sense to compartmentalize. Like,
Mhm.
I don't imagine calling a friend of mine who's like a super amateur poker player and talking deep about hand histories, right? Like maybe I'll have some poker friends and then I'll have some like general friends, or we joke about politics, or we'll joke about the woke crowd, or whatever the case might be, right? Certain people having different roles in our lives, or maybe oh, I have this family member and we've known each other for a while. We share this common history and we talk about those things and what's going on today, right? People filling different roles. And
Yeah.
I think for us too, like we can survey, well, what do we bring to the table for others? What can our strengths be? That's something that's important as well.
That's cool. How do you think like like, well, you're talking about like modern Stoics nowadays. So
Mm-hmm.
who are some of the modern Stoics who are most interesting to you?
Yeah, Massimo Pigliucci, I mentioned. He's authored several books. I've interviewed him a handful of times. He draws upon Epictetus and tries to put it in a modern framework and improving on or adding to the work that he's done. There's also Donald Robertson, who is involved with cognitive behavioral therapy. So he focuses a lot on Marcus Aurelius. Seneca gets most into the psychology of things,
Mhm.
I think. So he has books relating Stoicism to CBT. So I think that's really helpful. I chat with Kai Whiting, who's a researcher. We had discussions about all kinds of topics like the environment, vegetarian eating, and how can we apply themes of Stoicism to the modern world? What are some modern challenges that we deal with? So those are some people that I've chatted with in Stoic circles today.
Are you a vegetarian?
Yes, mostly so.
Interesting. Are you a vegan?
Oh, not, no, no. So I haven't been as strict with it in the past like year and a half. As I've been traveling more, it just hasn't been so practical to get rid of all animal products whatsoever. I'll ask servers and say like, hey, just don't add cheese to that, or oh, if there's a vegan option, I'll go with that. When I'm at home, I have a lot of control over what I'm consuming, as I can get groceries, bring them home, and do that. But since I've been traveling more, since life has changed, it's harder to keep up with that.
Does your
Although
stoicism directly influence your vegetarianism?
I was vegetarian before I found the
Oh,
philosophy,
okay.
so it's an interesting question. But for me, I think it was a very simple thing of just considering the impact on the environment, on animal suffering, and saying, hey, if I can reduce some sense of harm and improve my health at the same time,
Mhm.
then I should go about and do that, as it seems to be a really easy alteration to make.
That's what's been difficult for me. I tried to just go like plant-based before, and it was not healthy for me at all.
Yeah, I take supplements, so I have that. And for breakfast, usually, at least when I'm home, I have a protein shake. So I have protein powder with greens, oats, almond milk, and some water. Mix it up in a blender bottle, and it's good to go. I have an apple, banana, and usually lunch or dinner, I have a rice cooker meal. So I'll have different kinds of rice, usually brown rice, with couscous, with quinoa. And I have a steamer tray inside the rice cooker. So it's tofu, carrots, mushrooms, Brussels sprouts, like different kinds of veggies. Put it all together, typically with hoisin sauce or something else, and it comes out. It comes out pretty good. I often hear that it can be really expensive to be vegan, but my second hobby with credit cards and deals, I found many ways to pay next to nothing for groceries and gas. So I take a lot of supermarket sweeps. And at this point, I can buy all the organic stuff. It's not a problem. I can get pretty much whatever I want from there, including the baby Yoda in the background that I got with grocery points of all things. It was in the seasonal aisle. So you see, some people lament Stoicism, as I said, as like, oh, it's a joyless philosophy. But I could just find so much fun in all areas of life. I'm just trying to take on some kind of puzzles and thinking like, well, look, there's a rewards program over here. And if you buy these gift cards, then you get points. What can I do with these gift cards? And maybe I can convert them to money orders and then deposit them in my own bank account and get the grocery points and get all the credit card rewards and stuff like this. So it's been a fun and unconventional hobby.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like you treat it like a grand puzzle the way you talk about it.
Yeah, I have so much fun. Like just, hey, what can I buy in the grocery store? It's not a grocery item. And I found a community of people behind this too. And I think it fits well with Stoicism and just living a frugal life, finding ways to just have more flexibility and saying like, hey, I'd really like to have, I went to Stoicon in Athens, Greece, I mentioned in the pre-show, and the cash rate for the flight out there would have been about $1,500, but one credit card sign-up bonus and a little bit of spend on it covered the flight. And the hotel was covered by another bonus. So different ways to solve the puzzle here and have more options. So it's
what is the Stoic conference like?
Yeah, so it's a lot of speakers, different topics, breakout sessions, workshops in different topics. Like there was someone from military who was talking about how the military uses aspects of Stoicism. James Stockdale is a famous Stoic, a man who was captured as a prisoner of war and what was called the Hanoi Hotel. Mm-hmm. So he was tortured, and he drew upon the works of Stoic authors to maintain his composure and character throughout that ordeal. Cognitive behavioral therapy, as I mentioned, some of the speakers will talk about using that in counseling, using Stoicism in counseling practices. Some of the other topics were just on general modern issues, talk about the environment, as I mentioned. So it's like all kinds of TED Talks. And some will be more of just one speaker and then a discussion after. So it really depends on the event you're going to. But with the current pandemic, no one's really going to any events. So we're just waiting until maybe Q4 of 2021, as we're recording here in January 2021. So we'll see how it goes.
I can't wait to be able to get back into life.
Yeah, it'll be quite nice. And I think there's a renaissance of Stoicism in the modern age. There's so many groups online. There's a Stoic Philosophy Facebook page that's hosted by Donald Robertson that people can find. There are all sorts of podcasts in addition to my own that you can find modern authors. Ryan Holiday is another popular author that you can find his works out there. He runs The Daily Stoic. So there are lots of communities, lots of books, and many people finding ways for Stoicism to improve their own lives.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think we're going to reschedule this for a time when Armin can join.
Yes, the follow-up,
having
part 2.
Stoicism part 2. I think I'll have to go do some of my own deeper digging into these issues now that you gave us the Stoicism for Dummies.
Yeah, and I'm hoping, although it's been delayed a little bit, to be part of a book addressing Stoicism and Jordan Peterson, as that's a common topic in Stoic circles. Is Jordan Peterson a Stoic? Is he not? What does he draw from?
About that, but then I was like, that's a big conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
I think some of those. Well, we gotta talk about this another time. But I can see the similarities, or like why people would be like, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Justin. Thank you for being a patron.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in speaking to us, you can become a patron too. There should be a link below. And
Subscribe! Sorry for the eardrums, everyone.
Okay, he got it. And on that note, bye.
See you on Parlay or Parlor.